Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I'm going to start with a question.
Yes.
How many questions do you think Jesus asked in the Bible? That he personally asked? Any ideas? 307. You can go and Google it, okay? I didn't count it. Okay, I Googled it. Okay, so why do you think he did that? Why did he ask so many questions?
Check their knowledge.
Check their knowledge? Make them think?
To reveal that they didn't know the answer.
To reveal that they didn't know the answer?
Yeah.
Or that their answer was wrong. Didn't a lot of them do that? Yeah. So today, we're going to start by, I've just felt led by the Lord to examine some of the questions that Jesus asked. But I'm only going to look at one question today. And over the next coming weeks, when I preach again, I'm going to look at some more. If you find that interesting, I found it fascinating as to what questions he's asking. So let's turn to Luke 22 this morning. Luke 22, verse 24 to 27. It's a shortish passage, and I want you to look out for the question. There's a question in this passage, and it's the first question we're going to examine. Luke 22, verses 24 to 27. Just give you a chance to look at that up. I happen to be reading from the ESV this morning because it uses certain language that I needed to bring out here. But I will explain some of those words because the ESV tends to use some big words. Okay, everybody got that right. So, a dispute also arose among them as to which of them was to be regarded as the greatest. And he said to them, the kings of the Gentiles exercise lordship over them, and those in authority over them are called benefactors. But not so with you. Rather, let the greatest among you become as the youngest, and the leader as one who serves. For who is the greater? One who reclines at table, or one who serves? Is it not the one who reclines at table? But I am among you as one who serves. You are those who have stayed with me in my trials, and I assign to you, as my Father assigned to me, a kingdom, that you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom, and sit on thrones, judging the 12 tribes of Israel. So in verse 25, Jesus begins to contrast between the Gentiles and the way that he modeled. That contrast starts in verse 25 and continues through the passage here. Now, Gentile is a pagan, and that is somebody fundamentally who doesn't believe in God. Okay? That's what he's referring to when he talks about a Gentile. And then he also talks about kings who exercise lordship over people. I just want to give you what other translations say with the word lordship. They use the word to lord over somebody. And we will come back to that issue. But basically, what does it mean? It is an expression where you behaving in a way where you think you're better than somebody else. You are greater than somebody else. So these kings that he was referring to in the Gentile community were in fact doing that. They were behaving like they were much better and more important than somebody else. The other word I want to examine a little bit here to give you some meaning to it is benefactors. The context in which benefactors is used was it was a title given to the kings of Egypt and Syria at that time. And often a title tells the person who's got the title the importance that they have and the authority they have. And it tells the person who's on the receiving end of that title, who's listening to that person, the authority and the importance that that person has. So titles were quite important, and that's why Jesus was using those terms in this particular text. The other source of power, of course, is knowledge. And a lot of these kings had either knowledge or they surrounded themselves with advisors who were experts in various areas. So they had access to a lot of knowledge, and with that came power. And it can often come across in the attitude of these kings and these benefactors in terms of their attitude, like, I know what's going on around here. I know more than you do. So these words that Jesus used in this short text, kings, lordship, authority, benefactors, they all refer to powerful people who had authority and exercised that authority. Make no mistake, they exercised it, particularly in those days, and very much with an attitude of, I'm important and you not. So what was going on here? What started this particular text? Why was this argument, and what were the disciples in dispute over? They were in dispute about the fact that who was going to be the greatest in this kingdom that they thought were coming. They still didn't understand the kingdom Jesus was referring to. They thought he was going to sort out this Roman government, and they were fighting about who was going to be the number one, but number two to Jesus. Okay, but who's the most important out of these, out of them? And actually, this happened quite often. This was not the only time in the New Testament when these disciples were having this kind of dispute. I'm just going to give you some other references here. It happened in Matthew 18, verse 1, Matthew 20, verse 20, Mark 9, verse 33, and Luke 9, 46. So quite a few times. Okay. And this typically is the way of the world. This is how the world operates here. So if you're in authority and you need to be all-knowing and all-powerful, people must listen to you. That's what comes with this power and authority. And the world tends to put people in authority on a pedestal. And actually, in the world, we seem to see people, we put them there. And they think, if they're on a pedestal, that you're beneath them. So that tends to be how the world sees it. And when those people are on a pedestal, often what happens is it begins to feed their ego. And it kind of feeds on itself, and they become more and more powerful in the way they act. But the people who tend to lord it over others, that expression that Jesus uses here, is not restricted just to those in authority. Anybody can lord it over somebody simply in the way they behave. If I behave in a way that says, I'm better than you, I'm more important than you, that is lording it over somebody as well. So it depends on your behavior and your attitude, not only whether you're a king or somebody with a title or somebody with a lot of power. So just to be clear here, the definition of lording it over is to behave as if you were more important than someone and have a right to tell that person what to do. And we don't have to have authority or title to do that. So let's contrast this way of the world with true greatness. And as we listen to what Jesus reveals as true greatness, let's also be sensitive to the Holy Spirit as to how is he prompting us in relation to this particular text. So how does Jesus describe true greatness? True greatness. Firstly, he's very clear that he says to the disciples in verse 24, it is not the way of the world when he says here, this is not so with you. So he describes the kings and the benefactors, etc. And then he says, this is not so with you. So as believers, we know we are called to be different. Then Jesus says, let the greatest among you become the youngest, and the leader is the one who serves. So this is exactly the opposite of the world. Exactly the other way around. And it's not just a little different. It's hugely different. So Jesus sets the example in verse 27. He says, but I am among you as one who serves. What is he referring to? John 13, elsewhere in the Gospels, where he is, again, this whole scene is taking place around the Last Supper. He's with his disciples, and what does he do in John 13? He washes their feet. You remember that text? The ultimate serving role that he plays. And that role, by the way, if you might not remember, was designated for a servant. The youngest, not the greatest. They use this term, the youngest, being the least in our community. And then remember also about that text, what I found fascinating is he doesn't only wash the disciples' feet, but he knew Judas was going to betray him, right? And yet he washes Judas's feet. You remember that? We only discover afterwards that Judas goes and betrays him. But Jesus knew that. And I want you to keep that in the back of your mind. Imagine not just washing somebody's feet, but somebody you know who's going to betray you. So true greatness is not about the position or the title or the qualification. It's about our attitude and our behavior. Imagine our president washing the feet of the garbage collectors at the end of a hot day in Johannesburg. Can you imagine that? That's kind of what Jesus did. Why? The disciples have been walking around in hot weather all day. Now they come to the Last Supper, and that's one of the reasons why the servant was there to wash the feet. Because they walked around in open sandals. They had dusty feet, no doubt, smelly feet. But put that into today's context. That's how radical this is. This is not a little bit different. This is huge. So who does Jesus say is the greatest? He says it's not the one who sits at the table. It's not the president. It's the least. It's the garbage collector. So let's examine how important we think we are in relation to what Jesus is asking here. So I'm going to throw some questions out here. Just see how the Holy Spirit prompts you. Okay? Do you have a position of authority or leadership? Maybe that applies to some and not to others. Perhaps maybe you have a title. You might be a doctor. By the way, I'm not talking about a medical doctor. You might have another title. You might be a reverend if you were in another church. Heaven forbid you're a pastor. Do you have a lot of knowledge in a particular area? That's not a title. That's not leadership. You've got a lot of knowledge. You're an expert in your field. Do you perhaps have years of experience that make you feel like you got knowledge? You can afford to help people, tell them what to do. Maybe you have a qualification that gives you an expertise or a particular knowledge in a field. Do you know the expression, I had a brainwave? You know when somebody says, I had a brainwave? It's like this amazing idea, a brilliant idea. I want to share another expression with you. It's called a brain meltdown. You heard of that? It's when things, they don't work out right in your brain. Okay? So I had a brain meltdown the other day. I was chatting to Diane, we had a cup of coffee, and I said, I was thinking of this idea of studying a little bit further, studying some more theology, and maybe doing a PhD. And she said to me, just came out instinctively, she said, you know what, people would really notice you. And I said, no, that's not why we want to do it. I thought, I realized it'll give me credibility. And she said, yeah, it means they'll notice you. Aren't wives wonderful? They just know how to give you straight down to earth feedback. Anyway, I parked that idea, not because of the feedback, but what I did was, I really examined why I wanted to do that. And the funny thing is, you can justify anything, but God knows your heart. He knows why you want to do it. And if you listen a little bit, like I'm encouraging you to do, to listen to the Holy Spirit, He puts His finger on exactly why you're doing what you're doing, exactly why you're behaving the way you're behaving. And He turns around and He says, that's the wrong motive. Thank you, Lord. So pride is another form of greatness. And the problem is, it's a very subtle one. It's actually, we talk about pride, but we don't talk about it in the realm of sin. It's a sin. But it's so subtle, we don't talk about it. So we need to watch out for this, because those kings and that, it grabbed clearly, but does it grab us? I said earlier there, yes, we know Jesus calls us to be more like Him, to follow Him, to grow into His likeness. And I placed emphasis on that idea of Jesus washing Judas's feet. So I want to bring it back here and ask you, so can you imagine washing somebody's feet who stabbed you in the back? who's really done something ugly to you? Because that's what happened. So it's not as easy as we think. We've done it here in this church, by the way. We've washed people's feet. Very different context to what I'm sharing with you now. When last did you serve somebody in the organization you work, or the business maybe that you own? How did you behave with others? How do you behave with others with your position and your title and your expertise and your qualification? How do you feel when you have the right to tell somebody what to do? How does that make you feel? How do you feel when you've just been promoted? Do you remember when that happened? How did you feel? How do you feel when you know that you know more than others? How does that make you feel? How do you feel when people serve you? What goes on inside? How do you feel when you've served others diligently with a God-giving heart and you get no thanks? How does that make you feel? How do you feel when you've not been recognized for your contribution? Let's go to that table that Jesus talked about. He says he wants you to sit at a different table. Jesus' table. In verse 30, he says, my table in my kingdom. And I can only imagine that Jesus is at the head of that table. What a beautiful table to sit at. But let's examine verse 28. I'll reread it for you. You are those who have stayed with me in my trials. Jesus talking to his disciples. You've stayed with me in my trials. And I assign to you, as my Father assigned to me, a kingdom. Contrast kingdom with world. That you may eat and drink at my table in my kingdom. So yes, Jesus is asking us to follow his example, and he modeled it beautifully, particularly in John 13 where he was referring to it. Okay. But he's saying something more here. Remember the background to this? Right at the beginning of verse 25, the disciples were in dispute over who was the greatest. Jesus is saying, don't focus on yourself, on the worldly table, on the attitude and the behavior that we might be portraying. But stay with him. That's why I emphasize that. They stayed with him in their trial. Stay with him and focus on his table. That's what we need to do. Focus on the kingdom table with Jesus. And there's a big difference, as I kept emphasizing, big difference between the world's table and the kingdom table. The table that Jesus is at the head of. Let's summarize here, because we've got a big choice to make today. There's the world table, where whether we are a king or not, whether we've got a title or not, whether we've got a qualification or not, we can easily lord it over people. What is that? It's the behaving like I'm better than you. I'm greater than you. I'm more important than you. Or on this side, we have the kingdom table, where we can serve with a humble attitude. I ask you to make a choice today. What do you want to do? And let's change that attitude and that behavior.